Let's talk about conquest. When we hear that word, we usually picture a cultural funeral, right? One civilization gets wiped out, another one takes its place. But what if that's not how it works at all? What if it's less about erasure and more about a remix? Today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of ancient Persia, a story of how a culture didn't just survive an invasion, it completely transformed itself and the world around it.
This right here, this is the key to understanding everything. Cultures don't just vanish. They're not that fragile. Instead, they molt. They shed their old skin, they adapt, and they come back as something new, something different, and a lot of times, something even more powerful.
So we really need to shift our perspective here. On the left, you've got the myth, the common story, a smashed statue, a cultural funeral, game over. But the reality, the story we're exploring today, is over on the right. It's about a culture being reassembled, reborn, and remixed into this potent new force.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to tackle that smashed statue myth head-on. Then we'll see how Persia actually became the engine for a brand new empire, which led to this amazing cultural remix. After that, we'll look at the incredible payoff, a scientific golden age. And finally, we'll wrap up by understanding the lasting legacy of it all.
All right, first up, let's really get into this idea that the Islamic conquest of the 7th century was just the end of the line for Persia. I mean, the military reality was definitely brutal, but what happened to the culture? Well, that's a much more interesting story.
And let's be clear, the military conquest was lightning fast. I mean, we're talking less than 20 years. In that short time, the Sasanian Empire, a superpower that had gone toe-to-toe with Rome for centuries, was just gone as a political power. So you can see why the myth of total destruction started. But, and this is the important part, the end of an empire is not the end of a people.
So what happens after the battles are over and the dust settles?
Well, the new rulers had a huge problem. It's one thing to conquer a sophisticated empire, right? It's a whole other thing to actually run it.
And this is the million-dollar question. The early caliphate was made up of incredible warriors and nomads, but now they were in charge of a civilization that had been perfecting the art of government for centuries. So what do? Do you tear it all down and try to start from scratch? Or do you do something way smarter?
Well, the answer turned out to be pure pragmatism. The Arab conquerors basically looked at the incredibly efficient machine the Persians had built and said, yeah, let's use that. So instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, they just plugged right into the existing system. The Persian administrators, with their complex tax codes and record-keeping, they became the engine of the new caliphate. And this just perfectly captures the whole theme. This was not a one-way street. It was a fusion. As Islam became the new framework for life in Persia, all of these Persian ideas, traditions, and their sheer genius for administration, they started to fundamentally shape the direction of Islamic civilization itself.
This practical merger didn't just keep the lights on. It blew the doors open for this incredible creative explosion. This is where you can literally see, touch, and hear the remix happening in the language people spoke, the books they read, and the buildings they created.
Just look at the language. This is huge. In a lot of other conquered lands, the local languages just sort of faded away, replaced by Arabic. But Persian, it did the exact opposite. It adapted. It took on the Arabic script, but kept its Iranian soul. And what came out the other side was New Persian, a powerful, beautiful language that would go on to produce some of the greatest literature the world has ever seen.
And the ultimate example of this? The Shahnameh, or Book of Kings. This thing is an absolute epic. It took its author Ferdowsi over 30 years to write it, and it was basically a massive statement that said, yes, we live in an Islamic world now, but our pre-Islamic history, our myths, our heroes, they're still worth remembering. It wasn't rejecting the present. It was finding a way to perfectly balance it with a deep, powerful memory of the past.
We see the same fusion happening in architecture. You take these timeless Persian elements, like their majestic domes and the concept of the Paradise Garden, and you blend them with new Islamic forms, like those intricate geometric patterns and flowing calligraphy. And the result? A stunning, completely unique style that would end up influencing buildings all the way from India to Spain.
But this cultural remix, it wasn't just about beautiful poems and buildings. It created the perfect environment for something even bigger. It laid the groundwork for one of the most important intellectual flowerings in all of human history, what we now call the Islamic Golden Age. The hubs of this golden age, especially the new capital city of Baghdad, were absolutely buzzing with Persian minds. We're talking about intellectual giants, thinkers like Al-Khwarizmi, the guy who basically gave us algebra, and the brilliant polymath Avicenna, whose ideas on medicine and philosophy would echo for centuries. They weren't just preserving ancient knowledge from Greece, India, and Persia, they were translating it, mashing it together, and then building on it to push science into brand new territory.
And if you want just one number to really understand the insane scale of this impact, look at this: 600. For over 600 years, Avicenna's medical encyclopedia was a standard textbook in European universities. I mean, just let that sink in. A book written in the 11th century was still teaching doctors in the 17th. That is the incredible power of this intellectual explosion.
So, all of this brings us to the legacy. Persia's story isn't one of a tragic defeat or even stubborn resistance. No, it's a masterclass in how to adapt and influence the system from the inside out. I just love this line. It captures the whole thing so perfectly. Instead of getting crushed by the massive wave of history that was coming for it, Persian civilization figured out how to grab a surfboard and ride that wave, steering it in entirely new directions.
And that right there is the ultimate takeaway from Persia's story. Political states, they can be fragile, they come and go, but culture can be incredibly resilient. By weaving its own administrative, intellectual, and artistic DNA into the new Islamic world, Persia didn't just survive. It ended up shaping that entire world in its own image.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. If a conquered culture ends up defining the science, the art, and the government of the conqueror's civilization for the next 1,000 years, who really won?